If you're from Georgia, ask yourself, have you ever heard of Lulu Hurst? You know, Lulu Hurst. You've never heard of her? The Georgia Wonder? Well, I happen to be looking at a copy of her autobiography right now, and on the front page it says, "Ask anyone you chance to meet on the street, in the train, or on the roadside, and they will tell you that a few years ago she, a 14-year-old girl, startled and mystified the American continent as no living mortal ever did before, or can ever do again." Yeah, that Lulu Hurst. If you don't know, and very few people do, let's start from the beginning. Lulu Hurst was born in Georgia in Polk County in 1869. Her name was most likely Lula, but she changed it for dramatic effect when she started performing. According to her autobiography, she grew up like every other girl and went to school in Rome, Georgia. However, in September of 1883, she experienced a phenomenon that would change her life. She and a visiting cousin were in their beds listening to the rain and thunder outside when they were both startled by a popping sound under the beds. Both jumped up to make sure it wasn't an animal, but when they didn't find anything, they returned to bed. The popping sounds returned, and this time they didn't go away. Everyone in the house ran to their room and searched for its source, but no one could find out where the noise was coming from. The family talked it out and concluded that the noise was probably due to, well, electricity. The house was, well, as she says, supercharged with electricity from the storm, and the phenomenon would disappear as the storm passed. And yes, as the lightning and thunder moved on, the popping noises gradually faded away. The next night, however, the popping noises resumed, even though the weather was clear. This time, the neighbors were called in, and each tried to determine from where the noises had come. One neighbor finally asked out loud what time it was, and was answered with the correct number of pops. 10 times, then 24 times. It was an intelligent force, and one that could know what time it was. They spent the rest of the night asking the force questions until the sound faded with the sunrise. People came from miles around to experience the mysterious force for themselves. Chairs would be lifted even with 3 men holding them. Rocks and clothing would go flying for no reason. Somehow it was concluded that the force had a particular interest in Lulu. It would pull her hair at night or cause hickory nuts to fly from a nearby tree through her window. Lawyers, professors, and members of the state legislature gathered at the house to study the phenomenon. The power, as she called it, perplexed even the best educated visitor. It wasn't long before Lulu was called on to demonstrate the power on the stage. She would have a group of men hold a chair or umbrella, and Lulu would employ the power to lift it away from them. One side effect of using the power was laughter. Lulu would laugh whenever she demonstrated her abilities. That's how she earned the name Laughing Lulu. Lulu's power came to her at a time when American families were still caught up in the grief of the Civil War. Thousands of men had been taken from their families suddenly and senselessly, and in reaction, a wave of spiritual inquiry had swept the country. The Fox sisters performed seances in the US and Europe. Arthur Conan Doyle was attending various seances with mediums hoping to contact the dead. Ouija boards, tapping on tables, automatic writing, this all comes from that time. Lulu took the stage in Rome and amazed everyone with the power. In Atlanta, she expanded her demonstrations, lifting a man in a chair by simply holding the back of that chair. She would then have another man sit in the first man's lap and still lift the chair 6 inches off the floor. In another test, they would stand up a billiard cue, and Lulu would place her hand on top of it. No volunteers from the audience, singularly or together, could move the cue. The paper went crazy, and the shows or demonstrations continued throughout the state. It was a mix of feats of strength and table rapping. The Power would answer questions and make predictions. In one chapter of her book, she talks about traveling by train from Americus to Macon when the locomotive suddenly halted. A freight train had reached a steep grade before them and couldn't make it over, blocking the whole line. The conductor led Lulu to the stuck engine, and starting it up again, she rallied the Power to gently push the locomotive upward. In a short time, she had traveled all around the South and was ready to take on the rest of the country. Scientists at the Smithsonian Institution tested her powers under different conditions, trying to find its source. She mentions that some observers concluded that the feats were accomplished through clever muscular manipulation, but those opinions were drowned out by many more theories involving magnetism and electricity. New York to Denver to San Francisco, the demonstration traveled throughout the country, and soon she was talking about Hurstomania sweeping the country. Then in Knoxville, Tennessee, she announced that she was done giving demonstrations. She was not a believer in spiritualism and no longer wanted to be labeled as a medium. That makes sense that a Southern girl raised in a Christian home would feel that way. She made up her mind to stop exploiting the Power and spend some time studying it, trying to understand where it came from. That's the second half of the book, her explanation for the Power. She starts by confessing the popping noises that perplexed her family and neighbors were fake. The first pop was caused by a hairpin piercing her pillowcase, and she just continued creating the noise as everyone searched for the cause. The rapping noises on the wall were produced when she pushed a certain way on her headboard. The rapping noises were produced when she pushed a certain way on a loose board in her headboard. And that's how she produced rapping noises at the seances. There was a loose section of the table that could rap on the floor. As for the feats of strength, leverage and deflection of forces. She explains it in great detail, but I had a little trouble following it. Someone in just the right position can use a chair to counteract the forces of men pushing on it. She could lean a chair back and hold it with little or no exertion. The men trying to push the chair down just couldn't get the right leverage to move it. The force they exerted was deflected and didn't affect the chair. She closes her autobiography by telling the reader that there is nothing on earth that can't be explained through cause and effect. She apologizes for leading people to think she had supernatural powers, though she never really did credit her feats to the supernatural while she was on stage. The most powerful explanation she gives as to how it all kind of got out of hand is this. She was a 14-year-old girl. Once she started receiving lots of attention and money, it had already gone too far and she had no idea how to rein it all in. Finally, after 2 years, she called it to a halt and, to her credit, owned up to what she had created. She didn't give the money back, of course, but, what are you going to do? After seeing Lulu Hurst, a girl from Macon named Dixie Haygood began a career doing similar stunts. She toured the U.S. and spent 2 years in Europe, performing for Tsar Alexander, Kaiser Wilhelm, and Emperor Franz Joseph. She died in 1915. She's buried in Milledgeville. Maddie Lou Price from Barton County also saw Lulu Hurst and caught on to the act right away. She traveled throughout the U.S. demonstrating her feats of strength, performing in Europe at the same time as Dixie Haygood. Price was actually mentioned in a book by Harry Houdini, who explained how her tricks were accomplished. Together, they were known as the Georgia Wonder Girls, part of the spiritualist movements from the early 1900s, right here in Georgia.